interested in your views on this. We're also joined by Marc Lamont Hill, the host of Bet News, by Wajahat Ali, the author of the Left Hook newsletter, and Dave Smith, host of Part of the Problem. So a really top-class panel for a really important debate here. And let me start with you, Michael, if I may, about this, because we all remember the George Floyd horror, and it was, from my perspective, I wrote this at the time, I believe it now, he should never have died. It was a horrific thing to watch on video. The reaction was enormous globally. Some felt it was an overreaction. Others looked for fault in George Floyd, but ultimately I felt it was a police officer massively behaving in a way which should never have been tolerated.
Because he's a buffoon and he doesn't know how police techniques work. That dude did not have his knee on anyone's neck. I taught that technique in police academies. I was a defensive tactics instructor. He did not put his knee on his neck. Everyone in the media put that propaganda out so idiots like Pierce would believe it. That dude followed everything he was taught in his academy. He should not be in jail. That is a crime that dude is still in jail. And it's proof that Trump doesn't really care about the police.
And indeed, he's now incarcerated. Here we have again, in the UK, we have at least one police officer, but a group of them are there, but one who just not only refused to believe that Henry Novak had been stabbed, but the police collectively bought into the killer's story that he had been the subject of racial abuse and that was what was really going on here, which turned out all to be complete nonsense. I don't want to read too much into this, as some people want to. People calling for civil war and the rest of it. I don't want to read too little into it, Michael. This to me was a horrific thing, which is a stain on the British police. And I do think was a direct consequence of a lot of the fallout from the BLM period, where I think a lot of institutions swung the pendulum too far the other way and began to make terrible miscalculations, as we saw in this moment, where their first thought was to believe a claim of racism which turned out to be untrue. What is your perspective on this?
Well, the parallels between the Henry Novak killing and George Floyd are undeniable. They use the very same words, the very same dying words, "I can't breathe." The difference is this. Henry Novak actually was who the left pretended and tried to make George Floyd out to be. That was the big difference. You know, we can look at the killing of George Floyd and say it was very sad and it shouldn't have happened and this could have changed or that could have changed. Yeah. But the fact is, the police were there.
Yeah, it was very sad. Drug addicts should never die. But if you overdose, you're going to die. That has nothing to do with the police officer that's trying to take you to jail. That had nothing to do with him. He had like 6 times the lethal limit. He was dying no matter what.
Because George Floyd had committed a crime. George Floyd ingested 4 times the lethal limit of fentanyl. George Floyd then resisted arrest for minutes and minutes on end. And so the use of force by Derek Chauvin was a use of force of last resort. In this case here, you have this poor guy, Henry Novak, who is bleeding to death on the ground. And the police actually are showing you a 2-tiered system of justice that actually is racially discriminatory. That is all of the things that we were told were going on with the George Floyd case. The difference is in this case, there was absolutely no explanation, no justification whatsoever. It was the police taking the side of a perpetrator over the victim, refusing to believe the victim, I think, pretty clearly on the basis of his race.
Marc Lamont Hill, your response to that?
There are a few things that were said. So one, the police in the George Floyd case certainly used excessive force, and the force that they used wasn't a last.
Back that up. Let's hear some backup of that.
Resort. There were other measures they could have used, including not having their foot on his neck.
No one had their foot on his neck. They had the instep of their foot across his neck. Right there, that part. That's what was across the back of his neck. That's just to pin him down. It doesn't do anything to airflow at all. I've had it done on me 1,000,000 times.
After he was subdued, they still used excessive force. I think that's sort of indisputable at this point. And yes, a crime was committed allegedly, but police are often around when crimes are committed. You know, the whole job of being a police officer is to manage circumstances and situations when crimes are committed. And too often in this country and in your country, we see that when crimes are committed, police are an escalating force rather than a de-escalating force. I don't think this is a moment to say...
The media is an escalating force in America, not anyone else.
hey, the truth is white guys are the ones who are catching all the hell, or non-black or brown people are the ones catching all the hell when it
They're the ones getting stabbed a lot. Just saying.
comes to policing in this ostensible two-tiered system of justice. I think a better way of thinking about it is this is an opportunity for us to think about policing differently. This is an opportunity for us to think about force differently, and this is an opportunity to think about either reform or, in my tradition, abolition differently with regard to policing in the
Abolition of policing. That's what he's calling for.
streets and policing in our neighborhood.
When you say
I
abolition,
hate
Mark,
that this happens.
hang on, Mark. When you say abolition, are you actually advocating for abolishing the police altogether?
I am, yes, but
Big shock. The one black guy on the panel doesn't want any cops ever, anywhere.
I think it's more important.
You have no police force at all.
That is what I'm saying, and I'm offering alternatives to policing. So it's not that we fire all
Gotta
the
hear
police
these.
and let the citizens run themselves. There are other mechanisms and systems that we can install that would, like public safety forces, like drug treatment forces, like violence interruption forces, that would.
So if you're overdosing, they'll come out and help you through the overdose. But no ramifications for anything you do. You murder somebody, oh, no police here. Nothing we can do about it.
Do the jobs that police are currently doing, but better prepare those forces to create safe environments and safe neighborhoods. But I just want to finish the other thought before we get distracted by the abolition point here.
It's a pretty big point to distract the debate, I have to say. I mean, I hear you, but
it's
calmly
no more of
throwing
a
in,
distraction.
let's abolish the police. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to say.
I want to abolish Mondays and bills. Can we abolish those? That would make my life a lot better.
I'm glad that you find it extraordinary, but it's no more of a distraction than pointing to George Floyd's alleged crimes when we're talking about an incident that happened all the way across the Atlantic. In both cases, we could focus just on this incident, and that's what I'm just trying to do as I finish this last point, which is a very simple one. What happened here was awful. The police should be held accountable, but we shouldn't be seeing, I don't want to see violence in the streets. I don't want to see people harmed. I just want to take this as an opportunity to figure out how we can handle this situation differently. And it doesn't mean giving different outcomes to people based on whether they committed the crime or not. Even if I commit a crime, I still shouldn't be beaten or shot or stabbed. I shouldn't.
Why? Why shouldn't you? You should be beaten a little bit if you're committing a crime. If you put up a fight, yeah, you got to get beaten a little bit.
Be choked out of my life. No matter what happens, I should still be given an opportunity to have a fair hearing, a fair trial, and due process. And that's for everybody. I don't care what.
But he was, Mark. I mean, I guess that's the point. The reason there's a George Floyd parallel here is because of the claims of two-tier justice and racial discrimination and those very words, I can't breathe. And the distinction I'm pointing out here is, in the case of George Floyd, he was resisting arrest. The police didn't immediately go to putting their knee on his back or on his neck. They tried to subdue him, and he was acting erratic, perhaps in part because he'd ingested 4 times the lethal dose of drugs. And in the case of Henry Novak, none of that occurred whatsoever. Henry Novak was bleeding out on the ground, and he said, "I've been stabbed." The killer said, "He hasn't been stabbed." And the female cop says to the killer, "Yeah, I know, but I guess we have to check anyway, don't they?" There was a two-tiered system here. There was racial discrimination. I guess I'm just pointing out that what happened to Henry Novak is the real version of what people pretended happened to George Floyd.
Well, I mean, look, I'll bring in Dave Smith here. I mean, Dave, my opinion about both is that neither man should have died. Now, I will qualify that by saying that from all the professional accounts, it is more likely than not that Henry Novak would have bled out anyway, whatever the police did. And it's important to caveat the debate, I think, with that knowledge that was what was established in court. They all said, all the experts, that in that situation, it would be highly unlikely that he would have survived. However, what we've now seen on video in
one of the coroner's reports said the same thing too. That's what 4 times the lethal limit means. Like 1 time the lethal limit's enough to kill you. If you take 4 times the lethal amount, you're going to fucking die. You probably die in a hospital if you took that much.
In our own eyes, as we saw with George Floyd in a very different way, but we saw completely unnecessary, very prolonged kneeling on somebody's neck until he passed out and then died. To me, that's completely unacceptable, whatever the circumstances leading up to it. In relation to Henry Novak, we saw an unbelievably callous disregard for an 18-year-old man who was literally dying in that moment on the ground. And they didn't not only not believe him, but they had immediately believed his killer, who had invented this version of events which suited him based on race. And
the more important takeaway here is you can't own knives in England. Unless they're ceremonial knives for some weird Sikh religion, then you can carry them and stab people and you don't go to jail. That's the bigger takeaway here. Some people are allowed to break the laws and other people are not.
I think the line that can be drawn between the two is I do think that the hysteria that followed George Floyd's killing, and I think that's an accurate word, whether people agreed with the level of it or not, it was hysterical. I've never seen anything quite like it around the world, led to rioting all over America. The direct line is surely that the pendulum that swung violently then against institutions to be more racially sensitive, DEI programs and all the rest of it, I think there is a causal link here to the thinking of these police officers in the UK in the way they handled this incident. And that is why I think there is a genuine link, notwithstanding the deaths of two people. What do you think?
Well, I guess I largely agree with what you're saying. And I do think that in the case of George Floyd, I think pretty clearly, like, and Michael is right. There was a point where he was resisting, but by the time they had him down, he was subdued. There was no need to have their knee or leg on his neck for that long. And yes, I think it was a tragic situation. And I think that the cops were did not handle that the right way. But to Michael's point, listen, if just say in the UK or in the United States of America, if there had been a situation where not a person who was committing a crime, a low-level crime, and then had an incident with police after that, but just a black kid was walking down the street and a white guy stabbed him to death, and then the cops handcuffed the black dude while he was bleeding out and sided with the white dude who had just stabbed him to death, I don't think Marc would be up here saying, let's not make this a race issue. And I think that's the thing that's a little bit frustrating for guys like me and Michael Knowles who agree on everything. My show will be coming to the Daily Wire next month. But look, the point is this: it's not only this is how much it's a two-tiered system of justice that Michael didn't even mention. The Sikhs are the only ones who are allowed to carry these knives in public. You're telling me that your security agency, your government has actually disarmed its own. There is one group of people who's allowed to have this weaponry and one who's not. And by the way, it's not
so that's quite.
The police aren't allowed to carry knives, but the criminals are.
So that's quite interesting. Hang on.
It wasn't very ceremonial in this case, was it?
Well, hang on. But just to be clear,
but you're making it seem as if Sikhs are allowed to have weapons and no one else is. And that's
I'll bring you back in, Marc.
That's literally
yes,
the case.
He does.
Guys,
that's literally what the rule is.
It's not literally the case.
Let me just explain what the case.
I will tell you what the rule is.
Marc,
good morning,
I will explain because actually it's my show last time I checked. So if you just let me do the talking for a second. Which is that it is an interesting case because actually it is allowed for Sikhs to carry ceremonial knives in this way, in a way that it wouldn't be for me to do the same. However, interestingly,
my religion requires guns. I wonder if they'll let me have one of those.
It's pretty much the same rule in America, is our understanding, that you can do that as well. So we checked the Kirpan law in the USA. Carrying a Kirpan is generally protected as an exercise of religion under the First Amendment, but is regulated by states and local knife laws and banned from federal facilities and airports. So there is a slight caveat there.
Yeah, but Pierce, we got something else that cancels out
How racist of them not to let him carry it on a fucking plane. That's so racist.
that problem.
They're called guns, yeah. Yeah, but let's not get me going on your gun rules because we'll be here all night.
I'm just saying, listen, I know you're not going to agree with me on this, Pierce, but my advice to all Englishmen is that you find it to be your religious belief that you have a right to a handgun.
The other way to
in
do
self-defense.
Well, the other way to do it is to go the way that France and Germany have gone, where they have actually banned
We are in America. They would believe that is our religion.
Sikhs from carrying the Kirpan because they do think it creates a two-tier system in society, which I think is inarguable. The question is whether if you have it, and Bianca Nobilo, who does History Uncensored for me, has done a very good explainer, which we'll include as part of the show tonight, about the history of the Kirpan, about the 5Ks that are part of the Sikh faith and so on, which is it's not irrelevant because the vast majority of Sikhs, of course, wear the Kirpan and never do this kind of thing. And
I worked with a Sikh one time. He didn't carry a knife anywhere. What is he talking about?
in fact, if you take the Kirpan under British law out of its scabbard, then in that moment it becomes a crime. So you can't actually take it out and brandish it or use it. It has to remain in its sheath. So I think it's complicated. It's not as simple as it
How did he kill that guy if it stayed in his sheath, Pierce?
seems. But it does create, Dave, as you just touched on, it does create a two-tier system where if you're not a Sikh, you can't carry that knife in my country without breaking the law. But if you are, you can. And on this case, as was established in the court, this Sikh abused that right in the most grotesque manner possible. And it turned out he had a fetish for knives. He had them all over his house. His family did. So, this is one of this appalling situations where he's completely abused the system and the trust put in that system and the Sikh community. And his family conceded that in their statement. Let me bring